Who got you that bracelet?
The voice, dark and cold as a winter river, cut through the quiet of her office. Sophia Davis was admiring the pretty silver charm on her wrist when the question froze her blood. She looked up to see Park Jung-wook filling her doorway, his expression a calm mask over terrifying depths. In that moment, a simple piece of jewelry became a line in the sand, and he was already on the wrong side of it. Who got you that bracelet? The question hung, sharp and intrusive in the sterile air. Sophia's hand, which had been gently turning the delicate silver dove, stilled on her desk. She looked up, her professional calm a shield she raised instantly. Park Jung-wook stood in the doorway of her adjacent office, a silhouette of imposing grace against the brighter light of his own lavish suite. He wore a suit of charcoal gray, so impeccably tailored it seemed a part of him, but his posture was unnaturally still. His handsome face, all sharp angles and controlled intensity, gave nothing away, except for his eyes. They were fixed on her wrist with a focus that felt like a physical touch. "Mr. Park," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden drum of her heart. "That's not a professional question." A flicker in his gaze, surprise, perhaps, at her immediate pushback. Sophia Davis, his brilliant Nigerian assistant, was known for her resourcefulness and quiet efficiency, not for defiance. "Isn't it?" he replied, his voice a low hum that vibrated in the space between them. He took a single step into the room, and the atmosphere tightened. "Everything that concerns you concerns your work, your focus, your loyalties." She withdrew her hand from the desk, placing it in her lap, the bracelet cool against her skin. It was a gift from Minho, a junior architect at the firm. He'd given it to her yesterday in the lobby cafe, a token of appreciation for her help untangling a snarled permit issue for his project. "A dove for peace, and for the grace under pressure you always show," he'd said with a warm smile. She'd thought it was merely a kind, professional gesture. "My focus is unchanged. My loyalty is to my job. My personal life remains just that. Personal," she said, her tone firm. He moved then, with the silent, predatory grace that always unnerved her. He didn't approach her desk, but went to the window, looking out at the rain-smeared Seoul skyline as if searching for an enemy in the neon haze. "A man gives a woman a gift like that," he said, his back to her. "He wants something. Recognition. Affection. Access." Sophia felt a spark of genuine anger. It cut through her fear. "You're making a very large assumption, and it's not your place to make it." Jung-wook turned. The controlled mask had slipped minutely. A muscle feathered in his jaw. There was a raw, unvarnished intensity in his eyes now that stole her breath. This was not about protocol. This was something else entirely. Something dark, possessive, and frighteningly deep. "Everything in this world that touches you is my place," he stated, the words leaving no room for argument. The quiet truth of his hidden feelings, never spoken, now pulsed in the air like a living thing. "That bracelet is a problem. Remove it." The command was a violation. It crossed every professional boundary they'd ever maintained. Sophia stood, her chair scraping softly. She met his gaze, her own blazing with a courage she pulled from the depths of her spirit. "No." For a long, silent moment, they were locked in a standoff. The hum of the city below faded away. She saw the shock in his eyes, followed by a heat so fierce it threatened to consume them both. He took a step toward her, then stopped, his hands clenching at his sides as if physically restraining himself. "You don't tell me no, Sophia," he whispered, the sound rough with emotion. "I just did," she said, her voice trembling but clear. A dangerous, approving light glinted in his dark eyes. The boss who controlled empires was losing control, and the man beneath, the one who was protective, emotionally vulnerable, and secretly in love with her, was rising to the surface, raw and dangerous. He closed the final distance until he stood directly across the desk from her, leaning forward, his palms flat on the polished surface. His scent, sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped her. "Then you have one day," he breathed, his eyes drilling into hers. "One day to tell me exactly who gave it to you, and what he means to you. Or I will find him myself. And when I do." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. The promise of devastation was written in every taut line of his body. He pushed off the desk and turned to leave, the storm around him palpable. Just as he reached the door, he paused, without looking back. And wear it tomorrow. I want to see it on you when you give me your answer. The silver dove was a brand, burning against her skin all morning. Sophia moved through her tasks with robotic precision, her mind a whirlwind. Jungwook's command, wear it tomorrow, felt less like an order and more like a trap she'd willingly walked into. The bracelet was now evidence in a trial she didn't understand. He didn't summon her. Instead, his silence was a greater pressure than any outburst. It was in the late afternoon, as she was finalizing the logistics for a high-stakes shipment, one of the delicate, legally grey operations she handled without asking questions, that the first thread pulled. A notification chimed on her secure line. An internal HR alert. Lee Min-ho, Architectural Division, Level 2. Immediate transfer to the Busan Satellite Office. Effective end of day. Sophia's blood ran cold. Busan. A 4-hour ride away. A career-stalling move for a rising junior architect. Effective end of day. This wasn't a transfer. It was an exile. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her desk phone, dialing the HR director's extension. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Minho's mobile. It rang once before going to a generic voicemail greeting. A new, icy dread settled in her stomach. This was Jungwook's response. Not a shout, not a threat delivered to her face, but a silent, devastating stroke of his pen. He was erasing the problem from her orbit without ever saying another word about it. The sheer, casual power of it stole her breath. The door to her office opened. Jungwook stood there, leaning against the frame. He had changed into a black turtleneck and dark trousers, his hands casually in his pockets. He looked deceptively relaxed, but his eyes were lasers focused on her. You saw the notice, he stated. It wasn't a question. Sophia stood, her composure cracking. Why? What did he do? He occupied space he wasn't entitled to. His voice was chillingly mild. Busan has a complex coastal renovation project. His skills will be better utilized there. That's a lie and you know it, she said, her voice low with fury. You're punishing him for a gift. For a kindness. The mildness vanished. He pushed off the door frame and entered, closing the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. The room shrank. A kindness? He repeated, the word dripping with venom. Do you know what happens to men who are kind to what is mine? They get transferred to Busan. They consider it a blessing by the end of the day. The word mine hung in the air, toxic and electrifying. I am not yours, Sophia whispered, the force of her conviction making the words tremble. He was in front of her desk in 3 swift strides. He planted his hands on the surface, leaning into her space, his gaze dropping to the bracelet before searing back to her face. Aren't you? You drink the coffee I order for you every morning. You decipher the codes in my documents that would send other people to prison. You know the taste of my whiskey because you pour it when the nights are too long. You are the only living soul who sees me when the armor comes off. His voice dropped to a raw, painful rasp. So tell me, Sophia Davis, whose are you, if not mine? It was not a confession of love. It was a confession of obsession, of a claim carved in bone and blood long before he ever had the right. It was more terrifying than any love letter. She was trapped, by his proximity, by his devastating words, by the truth in them that resonated in a dark, secret part of her soul she never acknowledged. You had no right to send him away, she said, clinging to her anger as a lifeline. I have every right. The control snapped. His hand shot out, but instead of grabbing her, his fingers closed around her wrist, his thumb pressing over the silver dove. The contact was a bolt of lightning. His skin was searing hot against hers. He didn't hurt her, but the possessiveness of the hold was absolute. This should never have been here. He should never have looked at you. I am correcting the universe. His eyes were wild, full of a jealousy so profound it bordered on madness. In them, she saw the terrifying depth of his silent feelings, a volcano that had just begun to erupt. The intercom on her desk buzzed, sharp and jarring. A voice, tense and formal, came through. Sir? The shipment at Pier 3. There's an issue. It requires your personal attention. The real world, his dangerous world, came crashing back in. Jung-wook's gaze didn't leave hers for a long, heart-stopping moment. He was torn between the crisis in her eyes and the crisis on the docks. Slowly, deliberately, he released her wrist. His thumb brushed once, almost tenderly, over the bracelet he hated. "This isn't finished," he vowed, his voice gravel. "When I return, you will take that off. And you will never speak to Lee Min-ho again." He turned and left, the air still crackling with the energy of his outburst. Sophia sank into her chair, her legs weak. She looked at the bracelet, then at the closed door. The innocent gift had become a trigger for a war she never signed up for. And the most terrifying part? When his hand was on her wrist, she hadn't wanted him to let go. The silent treatment was worse than his anger. For 2 days, Jung-wook moved through the office like a phantom, present, powerful, but utterly unreachable. He gave her instructions through Kwon. He acknowledged her reports with a silent nod. The space around him hummed with a cold, furious energy that felt more dangerous than any shout. The transfer had gone through. Min-ho was gone to Busan. Sophia moved through her duties, a knot of guilt and defiance tightening in her chest. She had tried to call Min-ho to apologize, but his number was now disconnected. The completeness of his erasure was the point. Jung-wook hadn't just moved him. He had vanished him from her world. It was in the executive lounge on the 3rd day that she saw the true cost. She was delivering revised contracts when she passed the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the private courtyard cafe below. And there he was. Lee Min-ho. Not in Busan, but here, seated across from a stern-looking older woman. A headhunter, Sophia realized. He was handing over an envelope, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was being paid off to leave the company entirely. And standing in the shadows of a stone archway, partially concealed but watching the entire exchange, was Park Jung-wook. He wasn't gloating. His expression was cold, impassive, like a sculptor assessing a finished piece. This was his solution. Not violence, but absolute, quiet obliteration of a rival's presence. It was clean, legal, and utterly ruthless. Sophia's breath caught. This was the reality of his world. This was the consequence of a man looking at her with appreciation. She didn't think. She took the elevator down, her heart hammering. By the time she reached the courtyard, Min-ho and the headhunter were gone. But Jung-wook was still there, now alone, sipping a glass of water, staring at the empty seat. "You destroyed his career," she said, her voice trembling with a fury that had been building for days. He didn't turn. "I gave him a generous severance. More than he deserved." "For what?" "For giving me a gift." Finally, he looked at her. The afternoon light cut across his face, but his eyes were in shadow. "For looking at you like he wanted to know you. For thinking he had the right." He set his glass down with a quiet, precise click. His career here was a privilege. He forfeited it. "You can't just delete people from my life." "I can," he said simply, and the quiet certainty was worse than a threat. "And I will. For every Min-ho that appears. Until you understand." "Understand what?" she challenged, stepping closer. He turned fully to face her then, and the raw, unguarded jealousy in his eyes was staggering. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, personal wound. That every smile you give to another man is a withdrawal from an account he never earned. That every gift you accept is a theft from me. His voice dropped, husky with a pain he could no longer hide. "I have spent 2 years building a fortress of professionalism around you, around this feeling." And he waltzed in with a piece of silver and cracked the foundation in a day. Sophia stared, her anger dissolving into stunned confusion. This wasn't just possessiveness. This was agony. He saw her understanding dawn and his jaw tightened, as if ashamed of his own admission. He looked away, towards the city skyline. "Go back upstairs, Sophia. Your work is waiting." But she couldn't move. The puzzle pieces were snapping together. His intense scrutiny, his impossible standards for her security, the way he'd memorized her coffee order, his silent presence when she worked late. It wasn't just a boss's demand for excellence. It was the devotion of a man who had watched from a distance, believing he could never cross the line, until someone else had the audacity to try. "You," she began, but words failed her. He glanced back at her, his expression now shuttered, the vulnerable moment passing. It doesn't change anything. The rules stand. No contact with him. The bracelet comes off. He began to walk past her, back toward the tower. Or what? She asked to his retreating back, the words barely a whisper. He stopped. Without turning, his reply was flat and final. Or the next man who tries to buy your smile won't get a severance package. He'll get a lesson. And you will watch me give it to him. The silence between them had become a living entity, a third presence in the pristine office. The lesson of Minho was not delivered with a shout, but with a quiet, chilling finality that echoed in every interaction. Sophia moved through her tasks, the silver bracelet a constant, cool reminder of a line that had been irrevocably crossed. Jung-wook's confession of quiet agony had shifted the ground beneath her feet. She was no longer simply an employee who had upset her boss. She was the unwitting keeper of a dangerous secret. The annual corporate charity gala was an obligation, a ballet of power and perception. Jung-wook commanded the room effortlessly in a tailored black tuxedo, his smile a calibrated tool. Sophia, in a simple but elegant sapphire gown, worked the periphery, managing details. He had insisted she attend in a professional capacity. She knew the truth. In a room full of potential threats in silk and Armani, he needed her in his line of sight. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, a warm, possessive weight across the crowded ballroom. It was both a shield and a cage. Then, a new man approached. Not a competitor, but a foreign diplomat's aide, Alexander, all easy European charm and intelligent eyes. He sought her out near the Champagne Tower, intrigued by her sharp analysis of the keynote speech she'd overheard. Most people here are talking about market shares, he said, offering a genuine smile. You were deconstructing geopolitical subtext. It's refreshing. It was a conversation of the mind, something Sophia rarely enjoyed in these circles. She smiled back, relaxing slightly. It's more interesting than canapés. Across the room, Jung-wook's polite laugh at a donor's joke cut off a half-beat too early. His head turned, not with a jerk, but with the slow, inevitable sweep of a radar lock. He watched as Alexander leaned in to hear her better over the music, as Sophia's face lit up with the pleasure of a real intellectual connection. He saw the man's gaze drop to her wrist, to the silver dove, and linger with appreciative curiosity. Jealousy, cold and corrosive, flooded Jung-wook's veins. This wasn't a clumsy advance. This was worse. This was a meeting of minds, a spark he felt threatening to ignite. This man wasn't trying to buy her. He was trying to understand her. And Sophia was allowing it. The control he wore like a second skin began to constrict. He excused himself from his group, his movements deceptively calm. He didn't approach them. Instead, he positioned himself at the edge of the dance floor, a dark sentinel, his eyes never leaving them. Sophia felt the shift in the atmosphere before she saw him. The warmth of the conversation chilled. She glanced over and met Jung-wook's gaze. It was no longer the watchful stare of a protector, but the bleak, burning glare of a man witnessing a profound betrayal. He didn't look angry. He looked wounded. She politely extracted herself from Alexander, her heart sinking. She made her way through the crowd, drawn to the tension radiating from Jung-wook like a gravitational pull. You're needed, he said, his voice a low, strained vibration when she reached him. He didn't specify for what. I know what you were doing. He cut her off, his jaw tight. He offered his hand, a stark, expectant gesture. Dance with me. It wasn't a request. It was a reclaiming. The orchestra began a slow, melancholic waltz. On the floor, surrounded by swirling couples, his hand was firm at her back, his other hand enveloping hers. He held her just slightly too close for propriety. They moved in silence, the unspoken words screaming between them. He was interesting, Jung-wook finally said, his voice barely audible above the music, his eyes fixed on something over her shoulder. He was just making conversation, Sophia replied, her own voice tight. His conversation was for you. His interest was for you. He pulled her infinitesimally closer, his breath brushing her ear. I have spent 2 years in the same room as you, silencing every part of me that screamed to do this. And a stranger gets a lifetime of your smile in 5 minutes. He spun her, the world a blur of light, before drawing her back in, his grip unyielding. The dance was no longer a social gesture. It was a confession and a confrontation set to music. "Take off the bracelet, Sophia," he murmured into the space between them, his tone pleading and commanding all at once. "Take it off, and I will buy you a galaxy of doves. Just don't let another man make you light up like that again." I can't conduct business. I can't think. I can only see his face when you smiled." The music swelled. He dipped her, a classic, dramatic move. As he brought her back up, his lips brushed the shell of her ear, the accidental contact sending a shock through them both. "This ends tonight," he vowed, his voice raw with an emotion too powerful to name. Before she could respond, the song ended. The guests applauded. He released her as if burned, his expression shuttering back into impenetrable stone. He gave a slight, polite nod. "Thank you for the dance, Ms. Davis." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the crowded dance floor, the ghost of his touch and his terrifying, jealous vow clinging to her skin. The ride back to the office tower was a silent, pressurized chamber. Jungwook did not take her home. He directed the driver to the private underground entrance of Park Holdings. The message was clear. This was not over. This was business. His business. They rode the executive elevator directly to the top-floor office suite, bypassing the empty, darkened floors. When the doors opened into the expansive, moonlit reception area, Sophia finally found her voice. "Why are we here? It's past midnight." "Because my jealousy does not keep a 9-to-5 schedule," he stated, walking ahead of her into his main office. She followed, the gravitational pull he exerted impossible to resist. He didn't sit behind his monolithic desk. Instead, he went to the window wall, his back to her, a dark silhouette against the city's glittering grid. "The aide. Alexander. His full dossier will be on my desk by 9 a.m. The cold, procedural certainty was back. It was worse than his anger. "You can't," she protested. "His with a diplomatic delegation. It's a protected position." He turned, and the look on his face was terrifying in its calm. "There is no protection from me. Only by me. And he is not protected." He took a slow step toward her. "He spoke to you. He made you forget, for 5 minutes, that you are the axis my world turns on. That is an unforgivable distraction. He was just a person, having a conversation." "He was a man," Jungwook corrected, his voice dropping to a lethal softness, in the presence of a miracle he did not earn. "There is no just about it." Sophia's frustration boiled over. "I am not a miracle. I am your employee. That is the only contract between us." For a long moment, he just looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze softened into something far more devastating. Pity. Pity for her denial. 2 years, he began, his voice changing, shedding its armor. It became quieter, rougher, as if the words were being pulled from a deep, wounded place. "For 2 years, I have watched you. I know you take your tea with 1 honey, never sugar, because you once told a client it was more civilized. I know you hum a Nigerian hymn under your breath when you're focusing on a complex spreadsheet. I know the exact shade of exhaustion in your eyes after a 14-hour day, and I have orchestrated international crises just to clear your calendar for a weekend so you could rest." He took another step, then another, until he was within reach. He didn't touch her. He simply stood, allowing her to see the naked truth in his eyes. "I have built empires and broken dynasties, Sophia. But the most profound accomplishment of my life has been memorizing you." His gaze fell to the space between them, as if seeing the ghost of every interaction they'd ever had. His hand rose, not to grab, but to hover in the air, his fingers trembling with the effort of restraint. "Every time I see you smile at another, I hear his voice in your ear. I see his thought pleasing you. It feels like a theft of something I have spent a lifetime building, just for you." He finally looked back at her, his eyes holding hers with a possession that went beyond the physical. It was a claim on her soul, and he was surrendering his in return. "So you will end it," he whispered, the command now a plea, a confession, and a vow all in one. "Not because I order it, but because I am asking you, as the man who has loved you in silence since the first day you argued with me over a contract clause and won, to remove the only obstacle standing between my heart and yours." The air vanished from the room. The confession wasn't a romantic overture. It was a seismic event, rewriting the history of their every interaction. He had not just admitted a crush. He had laid bare a foundational, all-consuming love. Sophia stood utterly still, his words etching themselves into her bones. He didn't wait for a reply. The vulnerability was too immense to sustain. He turned abruptly, walking back to his desk, his shoulders tense. "The car is waiting downstairs. Take tomorrow. Think." He picked up a pen, focusing on the empty blotter, a man trying to reassemble his control. "When you return, you will give me your answer. Not about anyone else. About this." His voice was thick. "You will either walk into this office ready to belong to me as utterly as I already belong to you, or you will walk out of this building forever." He finally looked up, his expression a battlefield of hope and despair. "But if you leave, you should know what you take. You take the only light I have. And a man like me, in the permanent dark, becomes something even I do not wish to meet." He gave a stiff nod toward the door. A dismissal. Stunned, Sophia turned and walked out on unsteady legs. The elevator descent felt like a fall. She stared at her own reflection in the polished doors, now seeing not just an assistant, but the woman who held the heart of the most dangerous man in Seoul in her hands. The silence of her apartment was deafening. Sophia spent the day suspended in a strange, weightless agony. The world outside her windows, the bustling Seoul street, the delivery bikes, the distant rumble of the subway, seemed to belong to a different, simpler universe. She replayed his words on a loop. "The most profound accomplishment of my life has been memorizing you." It wasn't a line from a movie. It was too specific, too painfully true. He had memorized her. He knew her tells, her rhythms, her quiet triumphs. The honey in her tea. The hymn her mother used to sing. Her phone buzzed incessantly, work emails, a message from a friend, a notification about a sale. She ignored them all. One notification, however, made her blood run cold. An automated company alert, personnel file access, Lee Min-ho, architectural division, termination processed. Final severance dispersed. It was a cold, brutal reminder. This was the reality of Park Jung-wook's love. It was not just bouquets and whispered promises. It was a force of nature that reshaped lives, that erased obstacles with a flick of his wrist. Min-ho was gone, not just transferred, but terminated, his career in ruins. All for a smile, a gift, a moment of kindness. Is that what would happen to Alexander? To anyone who ever sparked her interest? The fear was paralyzing. But beneath it, coiling like a live wire, was something else, a terrifying thrill. To be seen so completely. To be wanted with such ferocious, all-consuming intensity. It was wrong, it was possessive, it was everything she'd been taught to run from. And yet, a part of her she barely recognized stretched toward that heat like a flower to a ruthless sun. She thought of the loneliness in his eyes when he'd spoken of the dark. The raw vulnerability he'd shown her was a gift more shocking than any confession. The Pak Hyeryang had shown her his bare throat. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and golds, her doorbell rang. It was not the delivery she expected. Kwon stood in her hallway, impeccable and grave. He held a long, black velvet box, not a weapon. "From Mr. Park," he said, his voice neutral. "He instructed me to tell you it is not a replacement. It is an explanation." With a stiff nod, he left. Back inside, her hands trembled as she opened the box. Nestled on the silk lay a single, exquisite orchid stem, its blossom a deep, celestial blue. It was alive, fragile, breathtaking. There was no card. It needed none. She understood. In the language of flowers, a blue orchid symbolized rarity, luxury, and a love that is precious and unique. It was not a demand. It was a testament. He was showing her what she was to him. Rare, precious, and worth a fortune in care. It was the opposite of the silver dove's simple, cheerful friendship. This was a love that lived in climate-controlled rooms, that demanded specific conditions to survive. A love as complex and dangerous as the man who sent it. He was giving her his answer before she even gave hers. The choice crystallized before her. Walk away and live a safe, normal life, forever wondering about the shadow she left behind in that penthouse. A shadow that might grow twisted and cold. Or walk back and step into the gilded, intimate cage of a love that was all-consuming, where her smile was a treasure and her glance a sovereign decree. Night fell. She did not sleep. She stood at her window, the orchid on the table beside her, its strange beauty a silent plea. The next morning, she dressed with deliberate care. Not in her usual crisp assistant's attire, but in a dress of deep emerald green, the color of courage and new beginnings. She did not wear the silver bracelet. Her wrists were bare. The drive to Park Holdings felt like the longest of her life. The elevator ascent was a countdown. When the doors opened on the executive floor, the air was different. It was still, waiting. She walked past the empty reception desk, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble. The door to his office was ajar. She pushed it open. Jung-wook was at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was staring at the door as if he'd been waiting for centuries. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, his perfect composure sanded down to something stark and real. He wore a simple black shirt, the sleeves rolled up, the first buttons undone. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had fought a war with his own soul. He said nothing. His eyes, dark and desperate, scanned her face, then dropped to her bare wrists. A flicker of brutal hope shattered the emptiness in his expression. Sophia stopped a few feet from his desk. The words she had practiced vanished. There was only the truth, simple and terrifying. "I'm not afraid of the dark," she said, her voice clear in the vast, silent room. "And I don't want a severance package." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, Jung-wook slowly rose to his feet, the movement unsteady, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The silence after her declaration was profound, a vacuum where the world held its breath. Jung-wook stood, the rawness in his eyes shifting from hope to a scorching, vulnerable intensity. He came around the desk, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them not as a predator, but as a pilgrim approaching an altar. He stopped just before her, close enough that she could see the faint, sleepless shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted it. He didn't touch her. His fingers hovered near her cheek, tracing the air beside her jawline. "Say it again," he whispered, the command frayed with desperation. "What you just said." "I'm staying," Sophia repeated, her voice gaining strength. "But not as your assistant." His breath hitched. The implication hung between them, shimmering and dangerous. Then as what? The question was a bare, exposed wire. She lifted her chin, meeting the storm in his gaze. "You tell me. You're the one who redrew the map. Define the territory." A slow, devastating smile touched his lips, not of triumph, but of awe. "You are fearless," he murmured, his hovering hand finally making contact, his thumb brushing so gently across her cheekbone it felt like a confession. "After everything, after my jealousy, my threats, you walk in here and demand a definition from me. I am not a thing to be claimed in the shadows, Jung-wook. Not a secret. If this is real, it exists in the light." She placed her hand over his, stilling its tremble against her skin. The contact was electric, a circuit completing. Or it doesn't exist at all. He closed his eyes at her touch, as if absorbing the sensation directly into his soul. When he opened them, the love there was terrifying in its totality. "In my world," he began, his voice low and fervent, "there are no partners. Only possessions and rivals. But you," he turned his hand, lacing his fingers tightly with hers, an anchor in a swirling sea. "You cannot be possessed. You would wither. And I could never be your rival. So you leave me without a word for what you are." He brought their joined hands to his chest, pressing her palm flat over his heart. The beat was a frantic, galloping rhythm against her skin. "You are my counterpart. My only equal. The sole exception to every rule I have ever lived by." It was a vow more binding than any contract. Sophia felt the truth of it in the frantic pulse beneath her hand, in the absolute surrender in his eyes. This powerful, dangerous man was handing her the keys to his kingdom and the lock to his heart. "Then the terms," she said, her own heart aching with the magnitude of it. No more destroying lives. Minho was the last. Alexander is left alone. Your jealousy, she took a steadying breath. It can't be a weapon. It has to be a conversation. He flinched, the demand striking deep. To ask a dragon not to hoard its treasure was to ask it to cease being a dragon. But he nodded, a sharp, painful jerk of his chin. For you, I will try. But Sophia, you must understand. This feeling I have for you, it is not a gentle thing. It is a living fire. I cannot promise it will never burn. Only that